You're listening to the Stoic Solutions Podcast, practical wisdom for everyday life. I'm your host, Justin Vacula, with episode 88, Discussion with Caleb Ontiveros. We talk about parallels between games in life, mindfulness meditation, frugality, and much more. Caleb is the creator of the app Stoa, which blends mindfulness meditation and Stoic philosophy, available now for iPhone and Android devices. Learn more at stoameditation.com. Enjoy our discussion. All right. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me on, Justin.
First, to start our discussion, how did you discover Stoicism?
I studied philosophy in undergrad and grad school for some amount of time, but I actually discovered Stoicism through a book by a fellow named Nassim Taleb. He wrote a book called Anti-Fragile and described the Stoics as being Buddhists with an attitude. And that description was pretty powerful to me. I was also really struck by his idea in the book about being anti-fragile. You know, a lot of people focus on being resilient, being able to survive stress, whereas being anti-fragile is being able to use stress to your advantage. As I turned to the Stoics, I found that idea was one of the first places where it appeared, and it really struck a chord with me. So I spent more time, visiting all the famous philosophers, Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, Epictetus, and so forth.
So you heard of his reference, then went to the classics from there, and then you became more involved with the Stoic community, right?
Yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's how the path went. Yeah, so in particular, I read a lot of the secondary literature, stuff by Pierre Hadot, Donald Robertson, some of the more popular stuff by Ryan Holiday and so forth, and found it a very useful philosophy to apply to my life.
And what were some of the concepts or practices that you found the most appealing? How do you use Stoicism in your everyday life?
I like to think about the upshot of Stoicism for me is on one level, on installing particular thought patterns. So something that's quite useful for Stoicism for me there is just being very vigilant about seeing things as they are without adding unnecessary value judgments. And then on the level of practice, there's a very specific practice made explicit by the French philosopher Pierre Hadot called the view from above. And this involves sort of stepping back from your egocentric perspective on the world and seeing your place inside a much larger system. So whether that system is initially your city, your nation, the world, across different time spans, I find, stepping outside of yourself in that way, either through, visualizations or through meditation, can help clarify what is really important and can help you shed yourself of much more trivial concerns.
Right. And Stoicism calls for us to make a distinction between events and our judgments about them, right? Many people will see the same thing happen. One might see it as an opportunity. One might see it as an obstacle. Some might say that's terrible. Some might have a different opinion about it, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I guess this is where the idea of being anti-fragile struck a chord with me. Marcus Aurelius has a well-known line that goes something like, the impediment to action advances action, but stands in the way becomes the way. And to me, that meant, simply seeing things as they are, not needing to make additional value judgments about those events, something like, whether it was receiving a poor mark in class or something like this. I received a poor mark in class. You don't need to tell yourself additional stories about, oh, this means that I'm terrible at logic or something like that.
Right. And we could use it as an opportunity to learn, to grow, and take accountability for what happened rather than blaming others or saying the situation is an impossible one, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. It could be easy for someone to say, oh, the test was too difficult, the teacher was unfair, but some others might look at it and say, I need to re-engage with the material. Maybe I could have studied harder. And people can very often blame others and not look to improve.
Yeah, of course. So, you might think, oh, I got a poor mark on this piece. And then instead of losing yourself in maybe like a negative thought spiral or something like this about how, oh, this means, say it was a logic class, that I am terrible at logic, will never be good at logic, and so forth. You might think, okay, well, concretely, how much time did I spend preparing? What did I do poorly on? Are there things that I can do better next time? You can even use your failure as motivation in a way. The fact that you had a poor mark in your exam is something that's external to you, right? It's not, once you have finished taking the exam, it's out of your control how that is handled. And what you can do is focus on, okay, of the things that are under my control, how might I do better next time?
Right. It's in Epictetus, one of my favorite verses. He talks about imitating those who play at dice. There are a lot of these analogies between games and life that we're to make the best effort we can and recognize that which is outside of our control. We could focus on the process rather than the result. That's the best we can really do in so many areas of life.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think you did a podcast on poker recently, and poker is a very nice example of this, where when you are playing poker, initially you might find yourself in a situation where you have a terrible hand and you do the right thing and you fold that hand. And then you see the flop comes, first 3 cards are revealed, and you think, oh man, there are my cards right there.
Yes.
And you might think,
I never should have folded.
Yeah, I made a terrible mistake. But the fact of the matter is, no, like when you play poker, you want to, maximize the expected value of your plays over the long run, which is basically means playing the best given the cards you have. And the fact that you folded your cards and it just so happened that you would have had, the best hand on the board or something like this is irrelevant. You want to make the plays that are the best over the long run. And I think that's a very useful way to think about the different Stoic teachings.
Right. And in life, it's having our focus on the right things, because people will ruminate on that and they'll talk about all things like, oh, I sat down at the wrong table, or this person took this seat and look at all the money they won. And, oh, if I would have held on to that, I would have got this result. Or they get their money in with the best hand and then they just happen to lose. Right. And they really, really put themselves in a poor position doing that, as some people even talk about people going on tilt, where they start to play a really substandard game and really start leaking money.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess there's the 2 upshots for this is like one on when you're making decisions, you want to make the best decision you can given the information you have and follow the sorts of rules that give you those kinds of outcomes. And then on another level, there's a psychological upshot to this, which is that sometimes when you do that, you basically lose a game. You will lose your money, or it seems like things might go south. But again, that's a fact that is out of your control and something I think you can build resilience to and learn to accept.
Stoicism calls us to take the long view of things, that, well, there might be a day where we had a difficult time, there might be some element of suffering, but overall we can have a more positive attitude of life. We could find joy, we could find fulfillment, recognizing that not every day is going to be a festival or a picnic.
Yes, yep. Yeah, sometimes life is hard even when we do the right thing.
Yes, and that's, I think, one of the big benefits of Stoicism, to try to get us through those trying times. How can we conceptualize? How can we have a realistic attitude about things? So many will just give up. They'll say, I can't improve things, life is terrible, and they just have this sense of perhaps learned helplessness, or they don't make any more effort to improve. Perhaps they're blaming others, perhaps they think they can't change, but many people have found benefits from Stoicism. Personally,
I found it to be exceptionally useful for clarifying my thought about a variety of different things. And just in particular, this idea that one has control over how one may respond to events. There's an external event, and before losing oneself in the fact that, going back to the poker analogy, you lost money, you think, okay, I lost money. Do I now need to make the additional value judgment that the fact that I lost money is bad? Or that I need to make the value judgment that, oh, I lost money because the dealer is out to get me. Or something
Yeah.
like that. Usually you don't.
Right. So making the best decisions we can and trying to keep that mental clarity, to keep the focus on the right things. And with mental clarity, you link Stoicism and meditation.
Probably about 2 years ago now, I realized that I've been meditating for quite some time, since high school. I hadn't made an explicit link between Stoic practice and meditation. And I had used a number of different meditation courses, meditation apps, and it occurred to me that some of the main Stoic teachings, in particular, like the core Stoic disciplines, fit very nicely with meditation practice. Meditation is, in a way, a gym to practice these core Stoic disciplines.
Right. And with the Stoic disciplines, can you clarify for listeners about those?
Yeah, absolutely. So 3 core Stoic disciplines that I'm thinking of, following the interpretation of Stoicism from Pierre Hadot, is the discipline of judgment, sometimes also called the discipline of assent, the discipline of desire, and the discipline of action. The discipline of judgment involves seeing the world as it is without adding these unnecessary value judgments. The discipline of desire involves sort of relegating your desire to what is under your control and what is external. It also involves, though it's called the discipline of desire, how we deal with aversions or things we find uncomfortable. Again, a lot of what we find to be uncomfortable or what we are averse to is really like outside of our control. So the main idea of this discipline is to relegate your desires and aversions to what is in control. And for Stoics, that amounts to, really broadly, your judgments about the world and then actions you can take. And then finally, the last Stoic discipline is the discipline of action, which involves cultivating virtuous character for Stoics. And this involves the 4 Stoic virtues of courage, temperance, wisdom, and justice. For me, maybe I'll step back a little bit and say a little bit more about the meditation practice I have in mind. Came from a meditation practice which involved sitting and noticing the breath and sensation. The thought is to simply notice sensations as they come by, see them as they are, and try to focus on maybe sensations moving through your body. Focus on the movement of your breath as thoughts come by, recognizing that you have a particular thought, that you need not do anything with it. You can recognize it as a thought without getting wrapped up in that thought. And I think this is the sort of thing that makes much more sense with a few meditation sessions. You have this practice of sitting and simply watching sensations and thoughts. And as you do this, you notice that a lot of thoughts we have are not immediately under your control. It's very difficult to, say, remain focused on the breath for more than 10 seconds.
Yes.
It sounds easy, but it's exceptionally hard. You can use this, I think, to practice the discipline of desire, right? So as you focus on the breath, eventually you will notice your attention wandering. And an obvious reaction to that might be some sort of frustration, right? Like you want to be the kind of person who can focus on their breath for more than 10 seconds. It seems like it should be easy. You can notice that as your attention wanders, that is a thing that happened. The fact that your attention wandered is now out of your hands, and you can simply return to the breath. And by repeatedly doing an action like this, you can build the ability to notice this initial impression and then return to the task at hand. So this is, one way in which a meditation practice is exceptionally useful for practicing the discipline of desire.
Mm-hmm. And a good amount of patience, courage, and humility, I suppose, would go with that too.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a initially quite difficult. I've been meditating since high school, and I still have sessions where I find it to be very difficult to focus on my breath for 5 seconds, let alone 10 seconds. That regular practice does take a good amount of discipline and planning. I think, another aspect to this is before meditating, I think it's important to have a framework for why you are engaged in the practice. The Stoics talk a lot about having a purpose for your actions and being explicit about, the values you are endorsing when you act. So, Seneca in particular has a line about, it goes something like, man who has no destination in mind while sailing, no wind will be favorable for him. He does not know where he is going. In the same manner, when you sit to practice meditation, you might ask yourself, okay, why am I doing this? For my case, it's to practice the Stoic discipline. And, in that way, you are, in and of itself, practicing, the discipline of action, having clear purposes.
And it allows you to focus on the present moment, as that's a common theme in Stoicism, not putting your thoughts too far into the future and certainly not into the past, because that's also something that's largely outside of our control, particularly the past.
One of the core ideas of meditation is to just be whatever is there in the present. And you will notice your mind wandering to the past, to the future, but over time, be much more aware of now, as opposed to all these matters that are outside of your control.
Right. It's a lot of ideas that people might have about the future. Oh, how will things turn out if I do this? What if I do that? Where we want to be cautious. We want to think about what we do before we do it, especially if it's a big commitment, it's a risk that we want to take on. But so many people could spend forever getting started, not take any risks, or be hobbled by, say, what they think other people would think about them, not doing the things in life that they would want.
Right. Yeah. So at that point, it's easy to catch oneself ruminating about these hypothetical scenarios where that has to do with others' judgments, other unfortunate things that might happen in the future. And it's useful to have the reminder that those things are outside of your current scope, and the ability to sort of, just return your attention to what is present, what matters now. Epictetus talks a lot about this idea of just being vigilant about applying the discipline of desire. He thought this is the first discipline one should get right. And, in nearly every present moment, being aware of what is in your control and what is not.
Yeah, the want of fame, the want of approval, all of these things, they shouldn't be of great concern, as Stoicism tells us to live with a virtuous character, that if we act in good faith, we make the right decisions, we properly apply virtue, that's what should be of primary concern. So with meditation, do you have other practices that you suggest, or perhaps passages that you read from the Stoic author?
One thing that is especially useful about Stoicism is that it provides both what I think of as cognitive and non-cognitive practices, where the cognitive practices involve thinking explicitly, rationally about particular matters, and then the non-cognitive involve things like this mindfulness meditation, which doesn't have so much to do with thinking explicitly, let's say coming up with a plan, but is much more about installing particular thought patterns. When I notice becoming distracted, return to the breath. When I notice becoming distracted, return to the present. Mm-hmm. Other exercises that I think, both of these exercises are exceptionally useful. So on the cognitive side, practices like premeditatio malorum or negative visualization can be quite useful. So the thought is, imagine if you want to practice, there are a number of different reasons you might practice exercise. One might be to increase your feelings of gratitude. To do that, you might take some of your most cherished belongings and imagine they are no longer present. Mm-hmm. As you do that and just sit in that world for a while, you might find that your sense of gratitude for things the fact that you have those things increases. So this is one reason why you might imagine undergoing this practice. And you can see why it might be called negative visualization, because you're imagining what initially seems like quite a bad thing. You lose most of your cherished possessions in this hypothetical world.
Right.
Another great aspect about negative visualization is that it can be quite useful for planning. So I think for me, this is another very important upshot of Stoicism, is that when one comes up with a plan for, say, what one would like to do for a given week, what one would like to do for a given day, one can imagine how might things go wrong? Where am I making assumptions about, how fast particular things will take me, how particular people will respond, and so forth. And if you sit for some amount of time either thinking or writing through a particular plan, you'll notice that by doing this exercise and asking yourself questions like, okay, suppose this plan failed, why would it fail? Or how might things go awry? You'll find that your plans can be a lot more reliable and useful.
Right, rather than just randomly doing things, acting on impulse. A lot of ways people just happen to go about, oh, it feels good, so I'll just go with it, right? These aren't good plans at all. Right, a lot of talk within Stoicism of not depending on chance or fortune, as we won't always be on the good ends of that, right?
I think, Seneca has a line about, treating fortune as if everything that is within her power will come to pass. That involves realizing that, we live in a pretty uncertain world, and to manage that uncertainty, we need to, be prepared. And that involves explicit reasoning and thinking.
Mm-hmm. And with the increased planning, increased just mindfulness of what we're doing, that should lead us to experience a better outcome or increase our expectations of acquiring some sort of value, desired end.
Yeah, so I think it definitely increases your chances of success. It can increase your sense of gratitude for what you have now. And I think there's also an aspect to the practice where, well, as you do, as you imagine outcomes you might initially think are quite bad, you might realize, oh, they aren't quite as bad as I initially believed. So a personal example for this, for me, would be most people having some initial fear of public speaking. If you imagine yourself giving a speech and, suppose things went poorly. Now there's the question, how bad would that be? And often I find that it really wouldn't be as bad as I initially believed. My initial judgment about how bad I would feel after a given presentation was received poorly.
Good. And that comes with the willingness to take chances, the willingness to expand, as there's a lot of talk within Stoicism about taking on roles that in one sense of life we might be called or feel a calling or otherwise feel appropriate to take on some responsibility in some position. And if we can master some virtues, we can transfer skills from one area to another, we can take on challenges and perhaps excel in areas where we think we wouldn't.
I think that this goes back to the idea about thinking about things in terms of maximizing your expected value and, not so much thinking about the actual outcomes of things. And as you do that, you might realize, okay, some of the most important things for me to do are to build these aspects of my character, like being courageous, being able to apply wisdom. And these virtues are useful for a number of different roles. And, being able to improve those virtues in yourself is intrinsically rewarding and occasionally also results in external payoff as well.
It's a strength of the philosophy, I think. It was past guest Massimo Pigliucci who wrote in his book that he found it to be a big tent philosophy, that people can come from all situations in life and find something valuable from the Stoic tradition.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think whether you have a religious background or not, whether you have some political orientation or another, there is a lot of wisdom in the Stoic tradition. And there's also quite a lot of overlap with Stoicism and other traditions as well.
Right. You mentioned Buddhism for sure.
I think there's like some useful overlaps between Christianity and Stoicism. This idea that a number of religious people hold that there's a reason for everything. Whether this is true in the metaphysical sense is that's a debatable question. But this sort of approach to seeing the positive upsides to tragic events and hardships is something that I think that both Christianity and Stoicism share quite deeply.
Right. How to respond to the nature of the world that is suffering is a big thing in Stoicism. In the ancient times, it was much more likely that people would die of illness, or there would be some exile, or all kinds of things that today perhaps we take for granted. Oh, well, hey, we get to live to this much later age, and our scenario is probably pretty stable in that there isn't going to be this big war that's going to break out in our country.
Yeah, that seems right. I think that, and even though it is true that the ancient Stoic philosophers lived in much more turbulent times, like even though Seneca was one of the richest men of his time, it's not obvious to me that I would want to switch places with him. Even on material grounds, the world has just advanced so much, and we are like so much more comfortable in general. But even though that is true, all of us will face hardships and severe tragedies. Some of our most important projects, most important relationships. There is, I think, a lot of value in returning to some of these core Stoic ideas when those hardships and tragedies arise. And there's even more value in building up the character to handle them before they arise, right?
Good. And it's undergoing quite a modern revival with online communities, modern authors. Why do you think this is the case, this tradition from ancient Greece and Rome now in 2019?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that is not something I have an exceptionally confident view on, but if I were to take a guess, my general sense is that I come from a background in meditation and philosophy, and if I think about, what drew me to Stoicism over, say, this sort of general worldviews that emphasize mindfulness, I think that Stoicism has, a very comprehensive worldview. So it's not merely about focusing on mindfulness throughout one's day, or say focusing on dealing with hardship via similar practices like cognitive behavioral therapy, but includes an entire worldview. So not only are there these different exercises or practices, but there's an emphasis on a very specific ethic, building these specific virtues. So I think that's one hypothesis I put forward. I think another claim is just that the writings of the original Stoics are just, really so sublime. I think that the popularity of Stoicism will wax and wane, but a lot of these, core Stoic philosophers will certainly withstand the tests of time, just because the ideas are, fundamentally true.
Right, and I see a lot of overlap within circles talking about minimalism, frugality, financial independence. A lot of themes within Stoicism calling us, as we talked about, to reduce our desires, to not spend so much, to use our money well, and to be happy with having less.
Yeah, that's a good point. So I suppose, speculating a little bit, is there's a general trend towards, I suppose I would say, something like increasing optionality in one's career. So a lot of people might think, I'll go to school and I'll have a number of different options about careers I can take. Then after that, I will choose a career and just advance through that career, continue to go higher and higher on a given ladder or status game. There's a lot of, I think optionality is not quite the right word. I think the word I want to say is something a little bit closer to ideas related to, this hedonic treadmill where you more and more things, though today what that probably looks like is accumulating more and more status oriented goods, whether it's a particular career, a particular office, a particular kind of accomplishment. And I think that over time, people realize that this sort of thing is empty.
Mm-hmm.
Life isn't about status. Status is one of the very first things that Epictetus mentions is out of our control in the handbook. It's, something that's external, something we should be indifferent to. And because of that, you might see trends like frugality, minimalism, and Stoicism pushing back.
Right. A simpler lifestyle of just being more careful with the spending and just having a more stable future. A lot of stress people undergo living paycheck to paycheck or being broke, and it's more difficult there, right? So if people can step back and say, well, maybe I don't need that expensive dinner, and maybe I don't need to spend as much on alcohol, or maybe I don't need this fancy new gadget or all of these really expensive clothes. I can be happy with something simpler. That's fine by me.
Yeah. So I guess on one level, there's the aspect, do people find achieving status goods ultimately fulfilling? And then on the other level, there's the question, I think the answer to that is no, but there's also the phenomenon where by pursuing these status-oriented goods, people end up harming themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So in your example, consuming much more than they need to. And the fact that they think they need a larger TV, a larger house, means, that they'll need to spend more money. And because they'll need to spend more money, they will, be stressed. They'll need to find a better job. And, and then once they have that better job, they'll have friends that now make more money, and causes lots of stress in other areas in one's life.
Right. A recurring theme in the Stoic texts about wondering about what is it that we have to do? What must be exchanged for what, I think is the line, in that if you want all of these nice things, what are you going to have to do to get there? What is the labor that you're going to put in? How many hours of work do you need to buy that Lamborghini, right? Couldn't you just be much happier with a used car that runs really well? What is the big gain that you're going to get from this thing? And it's also a phrase from the Stoics, under a thatched roof lies slavery.
This is a reason why Seneca in particular advised avoiding the trappings of prosperity, which was, quite salient for him, given that he was quite wealthy. And this involved foregoing particular material goods, the cheapest food, perhaps fasting, and also foregoing a lot of the status type goods, wearing just god awful clothing to social events. When you do that, you can the value that I assign to these things was much more than they are worth ultimately.
Right. It puzzles me to this day of people talking about having a nice meal and spending all this money when they can instead just spend less and have something nice anyway. It was a promotion recently. I went to a place, Texas Roadhouse here in Pennsylvania, where it was a free appetizer. All you had to do was just download an app and show them their website, go in and eat for free. But meanwhile, people were just spending like $50 on a steak. It's like, no thanks. No, not for me. I'm happy here with this amount and not having to spend the money. The taste of free is definitely for me. And with that, there are even warnings in the Stoic text not to be involved with the practice of butchery. There's some animal welfare concerns in the text too.
I think that there's an interesting view some Stoics have, which on the animal welfare thing, which is, so we have an idea we haven't quite touched on yet, which is that if one is a Stoic, one must live according to nature. There's a question, what does that mean? Some people interpret this claim as the idea what is natural is what is good, or what occurred in the past is what is morally good. Both of these ideas strike me as a little bit, unjustified. So in particular, that's a live question for me when I think about, how animals are treated, which tends to be, quite poorly. The recourse to humans are natural carnivores, I think is questionable.
Mm-hmm. And I see it as often a matter of reducing harm, that, well, instead of eating that steak, perhaps I can find something adequate on the menu that's a vegetarian or a vegan option. So why would I want to participate in that suffering that animals experience, the environmental harm, and perhaps the health risks for me as well.
It seems like often what one consumes is under one's control, and the fact that animals tend to be treated quite poorly and factory farms, I think, is a pretty strong consideration to consider these, plant-based options when one has the option to do so. It's just a matter of reducing the amount of suffering, whether that happens to humans or non-human animals.
You have an app, Stoa. Can you tell listeners about that?
Stoa combines the philosophies of mindfulness, meditation, and Stoicism. So, as I was practicing meditation, I found it lacked a comprehensive worldview. And for me, the worldview that was exceptionally useful was Stoicism, these ideas of the core disciplines. As I used particular meditation apps, I found myself wishing that a thing like this existed in the world, where I could listen to Stoic exercises, listen to mindfulness meditations along with Stoic quotes and Stoic themes. And then it occurred to me that, no one had built this thing, and that given my background in philosophy and programming, I should be the person who, it's up to me to bring into the world. Stoa is the result of that general idea and that general motivation. And you can find it on the App Store or the Google Play Store. It includes hours of Stoic meditations, quotes, and a journal. We're adding new content each month.
All right, very good. Anything else that you would like to add?
I suppose if people would like to follow me, they can follow me on Twitter at Caleb Ontiveros. I'd also be especially happy to hear feedback or experiences people have with Stoa.
Great. And can you spell that out for our listeners, how they're to find you online?
So my name for Twitter is CALEB M Ontiveros, ONTIVROS, then Stoa, STOA at stoameditation.com.
All right, very good. And that's where they can send email to you.
Yes, and you find my contact information on that page.
All right, thanks for appearing today. Good discussion. Thanks for listening, and stay tuned for more content, especially a second podcast project in weeks to come, which will focus on credit cards, deals, and travel for next to no cost. I'll be at StoaCon 2019 in Athens, Greece, thanks to the wonderful benefits which come with credit cards. Round-trip flight and 5-night hotel stay paid for with points. See my website for a credit card questionnaire where you can answer questions to be guided in the right direction. Visit my website at stoicsolutionspodcast.com where you can email me, connect with me on social media, find past episodes, and join my Discord chat server for interactive discussion. Support my work through Patreon, PayPal, the Cash App, and referral links by visiting the Donate tab on my website. Podcast music, used with permission, is brought to you by Phil Giordano's symphonic metal group, Fairyland, from their album Score to a New Beginning. John Bartmann offered free consultation and audio edits for episodes 51 through 63. Thanks to generous patrons and fans of this podcast who help support my work. Have a great day.